welcome to Collection Cut Down. Today we are talking about the best romantic suspense films. Well, my favourite, but that's all that really counts, right? I love romantic suspense films. I mean, I write romantic suspense books, so it's obviously something that I adore, and I take a lot of influence from movies. A few years ago, I actually wrote a blog post about this topic on my website, and I'll link that down below. It's still the most popular post on my website. I get many people daily looking at that post, and so clearly there is a big market out there for these kinds of movies. But the thing is, there aren't actually that many of them. I have to explain what a romantic suspense film is, because I'm sure all of you are like, but what about X? I take the definition of the genre from the book genre. I mean, other people, I guess, may have different views on what it is, but to me, it has to be fairly even between the suspense and the romance aspects, so like 50-50, maybe 60-40, but if you get any more like uneven than that, probably not a romantic suspense, maybe like suspense with romance elements or a romance with suspense elements. I haven't included ones where the couple is happily married at the start. It can be marriage in trouble where they're unhappily married, and it can be like they just met or friends or whatever. So those classic romance tropes. But if they're happily married at the beginning, you can't really develop the romance much, if that makes sense. The final thing is that it has to have a happy ending with the couple together, and that's what defeats most of the other things that are close to being a romantic suspense but not really, because, you know, someone will die horribly or they'll be separated or something. There's plenty of movies that almost fit but don't quite meet the definition. So without further ado, this is the best romantic suspense films that I have seen. I'm gonna go in chronological order just for fun. First up is Laura, starring Gene Tierney and Dana Andrews. When I first started getting into movies, I watched a lot of classic films, and, you know, I really just wanted to get a history of film kind of crash course. Laura was one of the favourite ones that I saw. It's witty dialogue, urbane characters, there's an intriguing mystery, and of course the romance. The IMDb summary says it all. A police detective falls in love with the woman whose murder he is investigating. At first he starts falling in love with an image of her. It's this painting hanging on the wall, and the stories that other people are telling of her. Spoiler alert, when she turns up alive, he then starts falling for the real thing. So the two need to figure out who tried to kill her, who's really dead, and so they work together and fall in love in the process. It's an extremely rewatchable film. If you like classic movies, I think this one's one of the best. The dialogue still holds up. It's really just a very entertaining film. Next on my list is a pretty obscure one. It's called Whisper Kill, and it is from 1988, I think. It may have even been a made-for-TV movie. I was actually surprised by how much I enjoyed this film. I actually just put it on in the background one day just for some background noise. I wasn't really intending to watch it that much, but I got really caught up in the story and really involved in it. Whisper Kill is about two investigative reporters, and there's a serial killer on the loose, so the two of them don't really know each other, but they team up to investigate the story. They start a budding romantic relationship, but then he starts to suspect that maybe she's the killer, and he still kind of loves her, so he assumes that she doesn't know if she is doing it, and then it kind of just becomes a little bit twisty. It has a really intriguing suspense plot. The chemistry between the leads is great. I'll be the first to admit that the quality isn't necessarily great. Like, it's clearly done on the cheap, and this DVD is a particularly awful transfer. But if you can get a hold of a copy, it's actually super watchable and super good fun. Next on my list is Sleeping with the Enemy, starring Julia Roberts. So this one is about a woman who's on the run from an abusive husband, and she starts a new life, starts to fall in love with the guy next door, and then of course everything goes wrong. I found the romantic hero very charming. I quite like Julia Roberts. I don't think she's like my favorite or anything, but she's fine. I just really enjoyed this movie, and the plot is very similar to a lot of romantic suspense books. If you're a fan of romantic suspense movies, how can you go wrong? My next film on the list has two titles. It's known as Joshua Tree and Army of One, and it is naturally a Dolph Lundgren movie. This one's actually a little bit of a cheat because the happy ending that I mentioned is kind of a DVD extra. I don't think the real movie ends that way, but there is a scene in which it ends happily, no matter how unrealistic that would be. The story is that Dolph Lundgren plays a petty criminal who gets framed for a murder, and he goes to prison and then breaks out of custody in order to prove his innocence, and he kills a bunch of people on the way. So, I mean, this is clearly quite a low budget film, but it is highly entertaining. There is this John Woo-esque fight scene at the end with guns blazing. God knows how many people die. But my favourite scene is there's this scene in this hotel room. The sexual tension is great. The leading lady is played by Christian Alfonso, I think that's her name, from one of those daytime soaps. She plays a cop who's off duty at the time, so she's a pretty badass kind of foil for Dolph Lundgren's character. And of course she eventually starts to believe him, so she ends up helping him. Obviously I love the happy ending between them and I watch it every time, but I really just have to not think about the logistics of that, because you can't just kill a bunch of people to prove your innocence and then not go to jail for that. Like, it's ridiculous. However, I love this movie, and fight me, it is definitely my favourite Dolph Lundgren movie, and it may actually be in my top 10 of all time, even though I know objectively it's not any good. So next on my list is one that I don't actually have a DVD or Blu-ray of. I wish I did. I've been looking for it for a long time, but it's actually really hard to get a hold of. It is Blink, with Madeline Stowe and Aidan Quinn. So the story is that he's a police detective and admittedly a bit of an asshole, and she has been blind her whole life and she's recently had surgery to restore her vision. And she witnesses a murder, but the thing is her brain is still trying to process sight, and it kind of happens on this delayed timeline, and she's not always sure that what she sees is real because her brain isn't processing it properly. So naturally at first he doesn't believe her that she has witnessed this murder, and yet they slowly start to work together on it, and he becomes less of an asshole, mostly because she doesn't let him get away with that behaviour at all, and it's loads of fun to watch her take him down. This is probably the sexiest film on this list. It was released in that time in the 90s when erotic thrillers were all the rage, and I'm sad that didn't last, because that like dovetailed very nicely into romantic suspense. Sadly there aren't that many out there, but this one for me is absolutely one of the best. I really love it and really wish that I had a copy of it. Next on the list is Fair Game, starring Cindy Crawford and William Baldwin. William is my favourite Baldwin brother, just for reference. I actually briefly considered putting Cobra on this list instead. They're both based on the same book, kind of different stories, but you can see the similarities. But I actually like this one better, and I have a different Stallone movie that is on this list coming up. So she's a lawyer in this one, and people want her dead, but she's not actually sure why, and he's a police detective who tries to protect her, and then when it seems like there is corruption in the police department, the two of them go on the run together. So I'm the first to admit that this film is very trashy. The thing is, I like trashy. I have no problem with trashy. It's very tropey, and even the sex scene's alright. Like, usually they're terribly embarrassing, but in this one it's fine. I actually think that this one is one of those films I say it's like so bad it's good and actually fun to watch. Like, a lot of bad movies are just like no fun at all, but this one, you know, if you like trashy romantic suspense, this is the film for you. It is very entertaining. This next one is my favourite Stallone film, and it is probably not the one most people expect. Avenging Angelo. It's another one that I don't have on DVD or Blu-ray, and another one I wish I did. They really need to re-release it. but I can't get a copy. I think this one is totally underrated. It's an action, romance, comedy, features Madeline Stowe as the daughter of a mob boss, but she doesn't know it. And Stallone is said mob boss's bodyguard. When the mob boss gets whacked, Stallone then has to protect Madeline Stowe's character. The thing is, he's kind of been semi in love with her from afar for a long time, and it's really nice to see Stallone play such an understated role. This film, I think, is actually delightful, which is not something that I usually use to describe a Stallone movie, but it's actually really funny. Like, I find myself laughing through it every time. It kind of makes me wish Stallone did more comedy, because he's pretty good at it. Like, his timing is great. Probably this one was like a major box office failure, so it put him off the idea, but I think he's good at it. Madeline Stowe's character easily could have come off as shrill and paranoid and totally unlikable, but she's actually really entertaining and, again, delightful in this film. Obviously, she is good at the whole romantic suspense thing since she was in Blink as well. They really take the time to develop the characters and the romance. It's really just so good. This is my last official film on this list, Smokescreen. This stars Jamie Presley and Cary Graham, two TV actors mostly, and that makes sense because this is a TV movie. I think Lifetime did it. And it's based on a Sandra Brown book, and I actually like the movie more than the book, which is unusual for me. But in the book, the hero is a bit of an asshole, which is no surprise because he's a Sandra Brown hero, but they kind of soften his hard edges for the movie. So Jamie Presley plays a television reporter who wakes up one day next to a dead body and realizes she's being framed for a crime. Her investigation puts her in the path of this guy she used to know, and it turns out something similar had happened to him years ago. The two of them team up to figure out what's going on and who tried to frame both of them. Warning, you do have to get past the hero's kind of assholishness at first. Rayleigh, played by Cary Graham, he kidnaps her. He's not the nicest of guys, but you kind of understand why he's done it. Like, some bad stuff has happened to him. No excuses, but, you know, eventually he does. I mean, it's not even eventually. Really quickly he softens, and you kind of just forget and forgive that he was a bit of a dick to start. He actually ends up totally delightful, which was a surprise to me, I can assure you. So my favorite thing about this movie is just the way he looks at her. Like, every time he's staring at her with this half smile on his face, and he makes no effort to hide the fact that he's super into her. And she's so feisty and determined, and you can see why he really likes her. And I just think they work really well together as a couple. There have actually been a couple of Sandra Brown books that have been adapted. I know White Hot was, and Ricochet, but this is by far my favorite. And just like as a personal thing, I really wish more film companies would adapt romantic suspense books. And not even mine, though I wouldn't say no to that, but just in general, because there's such a wealth of great material there, and romantic suspense movies in general are such an untapped possibility. And so that it's just right there for the taking, and yet they don't seem to be interested in it, and it's really weird, and I really wish that, you know, they'd get their head right, because this needs to happen. As I said, there is a market for this. I would watch literally any romantic suspense movie adapted from a book, or just, you know, written. I'm just craving them. I have one last film that is going to get an honourable mention. I don't think I can quite include it in my criteria for a romantic suspense, but it's very close. But I didn't want to entirely cheat. I already did that with Army of One, the Dolph Lundgren films. So this one is my favourite Van Damme film, Nowhere to Run. I've talked a lot about my love for Van Damme films, and this one is my absolute favourite. It's about an ex-con, and he's kind of on the run, again, like the Dolph Lundgren film, and he sort of stumbles across this widow and her two children living in this semi-isolated sort of farmhouse type thing. He realises that she's and all the other townsfolk are being terrorised by this big bad, and so he kind of hides out there but also can't help getting involved. There's definitely like a strong focus on the romance. The suspense is good. Way less action than most Van Damme films. I usually like the action, but because the focus was on the romance in this, I could not complain. The only reason it doesn't really fit into my criteria is the ending. It ends with him being taken away in handcuffs and promising to wait for her and come back for her once he's served his time, and her and the kids are like all upset and saying they're gonna wait for him too and all that sort of stuff. The commitment is there, but I couldn't really justify saying it was a happy ending considering he's in prison and they're not really together, even though they had made a commitment to each other. But because it's my favourite Van Damme film and you know, it's nearly there, it goes on the list as an honourable mention. So what are your favourite romantic suspense films? Please recommend them to me. I am obviously starving for them. I will literally watch anything, but don't forget the happy ending. That's very important. Do you agree with my list? Please let me know in the comments if you have seen any of these films, liked, hated, whatever any of these films, or if you have anything more that you would like to add. And please consider liking and subscribing so you get notifications of when new videos come out. But otherwise, bye for now and happy watching!
Mm-hmm.